Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Pat Gross.
And why are you here in this spot?
Well, I'm here because I'm captured revolutionary. I was captured in November of 1984, along with my husband and some other comrades in Ohio, and we came to be known as the Ohio 7.
The 8 defendants are accused of conspiring to overthrow the government of the United States by force through a pattern of bombings, bank robberies, and murder. The indictments allege that the group was formed in 1974 by Raymond Levasseur, formerly of Calais, Maine.
My name is Raymond Luc Levasseur, 41 years old, originally from Maine. My people are French-Canadian. My father was born in Quebec, immigrated to Maine with his family in search of work, primarily in textile mills and shoe factories.
Thomas Manning, formerly of Sanford, Maine, and his wife, Carol Manning. The Mannings were arrested in Cleveland a year ago on other charges.
I'm Carol Saucier Manning. I'm 31 years old, 32 years old. I forgot. I am the mother of 3 children, ages 14, 7, and 6. I am also from a small mill town in Keesa Falls, Maine. A lot of my background is very similar to Ray's. I'm also from a French-Canadian heritage. Both my parents were woolen mill workers.
The murder of New Jersey State Trooper Philip LaMonaco in December 1981 is alleged to have been committed by defendants Thomas Manning and Richard Williams.
I'm Tom Manning. I'm born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. Early part of my growing up was in the projects in East Boston, basically on the waterfront. I grew up playing in the freight yards and on the docks, you know, around Boston. My father was a longshoreman during the days. He worked in the post office at night. Always, as long as I can remember, he worked 2 jobs unless he was there, and didn't, you know, that's the only way he would get his vacations, is if he broke his thumb or something. We were from a, you know, working class, poor. You know, if we wanted a quarter when we were kids, we had to go out and shine shoes for it instead of going home and asking for it, you know. So those are the kinds of things that I did a lot. Shine shoes, sold newspapers, hustled up empty bottles, stuff like that. I lived in an Italian neighborhood most of the time, and being Irish, I got a strong feel about how it felt to be different and how it felt to have to defend yourself because you were different. I used to get in a lot of fist fights because I had blue eyes, basically.
6 of the so-called Ohio 7 have already been arraigned at federal court in Boston. Today, Richard Williams and Thomas Manning were arraigned. The 40-year-old Manning said, "We are guilty of no crimes." And Williams, when asked to enter a plea, said, "Guilty of no crimes."
My name is Richard Charles Williams. I'm 40 years old. I'm from Beverly, Massachusetts, which is a town of about, it's a city actually, of about 35,000 people, about 20 miles north of Boston. I come from working class parents. My father was a machine operator. My mother was a seamstress and factory worker.
The bombing of the Suffolk County Courthouse in Boston on April 22, 1976 is just one of 19 bombings the defendants are alleged to have committed in the Northeast.
Hi, my name is Barbara Kersey-Lahman. I'm 30 years old and the mother of 3 children, ages 6, almost 13 and 14. Getting big. I, like Tommy, also grew up in East Boston, even though Tommy left. Before I did, I grew up, until I married and moved to Italy, I lived in East Boston. And I had to laugh when he said he got beat up because he was blue-eyed, because I was blue-eyed, but I was Italian, so I didn't get beat up for being blue-eyed, but I'm the youngest of 4 children, and as I said, Italian family. All of my grandparents came from Italy in their early 20s during the Depression, and I was lucky enough to live in an extended family household with my grandmother, and she really enriched my life a lot with stories of her life. And I was lucky that she had a really good consciousness about people, about social issues. You know, having worked in factories, making Navy jackets where the bosses wouldn't give them a scissors, so they had to rip the threads with their fingers, and the threads were supposed to be not breakable threads, so they always had cuts and blood and, you know, infections from this. And all the workers would get together about stuff like this, but, you know, there's just little stories like that she would tell me about, that, you know, all of the workers, black and Hispanic and Jewish and Italian, would all have the same problem. So she and my family basically being kind of preaching a Catholic or Christian thing about everybody's equal and treat everybody as you'd want them to treat you. I grew up believing what they were saying, that's how I was supposed to act.
The 8 defendants are specifically charged with seditious conspiracy. That is, that they committed crimes meant to weaken the national government. They're accused in a number of bank robberies and the bombings of courthouses in Boston and in Lowell.
My name is Jan Laman. I'm 39 years old for about another week. And middle of a little cold here, so it's not just stage fright, because my voice sounds too weird. I'm an Estonian. I came to this country with my family at about 3 years old. We arrived in New York City, but went to live in Boston. We lived in Roxbury. So my experience coming to life, so to speak, in this country was from the perspective of living in the middle of a black community, which actually I'm very grateful for now as I look back at it, because right from the beginning I got an understanding of what racism is all about, what discrimination is all about, what sort of the underbelly of the United States is really all about.
I grew up in a time of, my father was recruiting for the Vietnam War, and I grew up in a very racially segregated town. I became aware fairly young that I had few options as a working class woman in that area of the country. And I was tracked into a business type of course in high school so that I could go out and become a clerk typist when I graduated. It was a very economically depressed area for everyone, and I became aware early on of the big difference between how black people and white people lived in that area. It was very defined by certain boundaries in the town between Delmar and Salisbury, Maryland, where one side of town would have sidewalks and the other side wouldn't. And one school was very run down, and the white section got a new school.
For me, going to school and being pretty much put in a class of, you know, well, I was going to be a mill worker. I was never given any direction that there were other things that I possibly could be, you know, not like I didn't look at that I could go to college or whatever, because for me it wasn't, you know, we didn't have the income, you know. I was never sat down by a counselor or whatever and said, you know, well, Carol, you have these options, you know, you can do this and that, you know, depending upon what you want. I was never given that sort of direction. So I basically went through school looking that when I got out of school, I was also going to be a mill worker, and that's what I saw happen all around me. You know, families, their children, they ended up working in the mills. You know, a few would end up leaving and going to college. But the large part of us, we carried on what our mothers and fathers did.
So when my turn came after I got out of school, I went to work in a factory that made heels for shoes. And then in non-unionized, low-paying, health hazardous work. At that time, there was a recession, 1964, and so looking for better economic opportunity, I moved to Boston. I went to Boston when I was 17 and began working on the loading docks off Northern Avenue near South Boston. And then my number came up and I went into the United States Army and got my training on how to kill from the government. And then in 1967, I spent a full tour of duty in Vietnam.
They told me I was going to Southeast Asia. I actually had to go and look it up, what is Southeast Asia. They never said Vietnam at the time. This is early 65. You know? So eventually I ended up getting off a plane in Da Nang. We made a lot of hops. We left from Rhode Island. We made a lot of hops on the way. We stopped on the West Coast. We stopped in Alaska. We stopped in Japan. The first thing that hit me was we took a break in Japan and it was cold. It was like icy rain, standing out under the planes on the runway, stretching our legs, you know. Got back on the plane, and next time we stepped out, it was in Da Nang, and it was about 120 degrees, and it was stinking, you know. We were in these dirt floor huts where there were body bags with flies buzzing all around them, stinking. It has been sitting out in the sun, you know. That was my first impression of Vietnam. While we were waiting to get picked up by the trucks, we got hit with some incoming, you know, so I ended up laying in the dirt, smelling these body bags and saying, Jesus Christ, what the hell did I get into?
I was 18 years old. I didn't even have a high school diploma. And I was sitting in, you know, prison in New York State, which was a pretty terrible and frightening and harsh reality to deal with. And what I did is I stopped and I sat back and I reflected about why I was there and what it meant and what direction my life was going in and why it was going that way. And at that time particularly, I reflected back on more than just, you know, the neighborhoods and the streets, and also back towards, you know, things I had heard in my family, and giving some thought to, like, well, why is it that, you know, not only that I was in jail as a particular individual, but why is it that, you know, this jail was full of, you know, more than half black people and a good number of Spanish and the rest were poor whites? I mean, why is that situation like that? And also, of course, this was 1965, 66, just at the time when the increase in the Vietnam War, the escalation in that situation was building. And so I started to make certain connections about what was going on politically, what was going on personally in my life, what was going on as far as the direction that the government was taking. Why were the body bags that were coming back primarily, you know, all working class kids, black kids, you know, the same kind of people that were sitting in the jail cells next to me were the same kind of kids that were sending off to Vietnam and coming back in those body bags. I mean, those kind of issues I started to think about really for the first time in my life.
My father was recruiting people into the Army. He had recruited people that went to Vietnam who had been our neighbors who had come back and had died in Vietnam, and it started to have an effect on our community. And in a personal way, my father began to feel very responsible because in an economically deprived area, both black and white people were going to the Army as a way to get training and a way to learn skills. And my father would talk to people about, you can go there and get a skill where you wouldn't be able to get it otherwise. And if there's a black person, you could go there and you could achieve something that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise because of your station in life. And as it turned out, people were not going to learn any skills. They were going to kill Vietnamese people and to try to affect this government's position of what government those people should have.
I did 7 months in Nam. While I was over there, I did a lot of drinking, a lot of smoking marijuana, smoking Thai sticks. I was not a happy military person.
I was not a political person before I went to Vietnam, not an activist in any sense of the word. My family were not involved in any kind of even traditional politics of the Republican or Democratic sort. So being in Vietnam was like a slap in the face in a sense that it made me aware, began to make me aware of what not only war means to people, both young soldiers and civilians, but what United States foreign policy meant and what U.S. intervention in the invasion of Vietnam meant.
I was very fortunate that I got to know a few older black convicts who, having had much more wisdom and insight than I had at that time, being 18 years old, shared some of that insight with me, suggested certain books to read, Malcolm X autobiography and certain other things like that, that really gave me more of a direction and understanding about what was going on and why it was going on. Not only what was going on, because my own life experience had given me that kind of insight to some degree, but also why it was going on. That it wasn't just, you know, a personal problem that I had, and it wasn't just a personal problem that, you know, these other thousands of people that were stuck in prisons had, or stuck in the bottom of a you know, bad job situation, or unemployed and so forth. And some of this understanding, you know, really started to click in my own head, and it gave me the direction and enthusiasm to, like, get through this jail situation and not come back out in the streets maybe more embittered, and just get back into a more sophisticated level of the activity that you know, got me in jail in the first place, some kind of, you know, criminal activity. And instead, you know, I was very clear in my understanding that as soon as I was released, that what I would want to do was become involved in trying to, you know, learn more about and trying to work towards solutions for these issues that were really becoming clear to me while I was in captivity.
And so the time was 1967, and there had been riots in Baltimore, Maryland, and some racial riots in Cambridge, Maryland, and some spillover in Salisbury, where people had done some rioting and just were angry and were demonstrating that. And a black man had been killed who was deaf, that everybody in town knew there was, by a white detective. And I just thought that something had to be done. But I was not all that responsible, didn't feel like there was much that I could do, so I just left Maryland and traveled around the country. And I was part of a lot of people at that time who were doing the same thing. People who were my age, who were protesting the Vietnam War, or just sort of not going along with the mainstream of society, and were doing some drugs and traveling and doing a lot of questioning. I didn't at first leave thinking that I was doing the same thing as many other people, but I was.
So when I left the Army, I was in Tennessee at the time, became involved in the Southern Student Organizing Committee. I became involved in an alternate paper, sometimes called Underground Papers during that time. And I was also attended a university in Tennessee. And our work primarily focused on anti-war work, trying to do what we could in conjunction with a lot of other people in this country to bring an end to the war in Vietnam, and to support the civil rights, black liberation struggle at that time.
I was able to get right into school when I got out. I went to Cornell for a semester, joined SDS while I was there, became involved in the anti-war struggle, understanding that that was a crucial issue at that time, kind of like the central issue that so many of the other realities, harsh realities of American life spun off of what you're talking about. You know, the money that was spent going to support the war in Vietnam, how that money then was taken out of the pockets of, you know, the various other social programs that were not being funded, you know, within the country itself, how the war, like all institutions and all realities of life in this country, was based on a racial discrimination basis. In other words, more blacks were getting killed, more were going into the service, more were frontline troops and so forth. I mean, it was reflected, certainly, that racism was reflected within the war itself, just like it was reflected within society as a whole.
I was raised with the idea that, of course, racism shouldn't exist, and therefore my parents acted like, of course you're not racist, and of course you just do the right thing. But I found that not to be true in my community when instead, in 1975, when I returned to the United States, busing was put into practice in Boston for desegregation, and the people went crazy and started attacking the children in the buses. And there were a few black families that lived in my neighborhood from when I was a child, and I knew the children from kindergarten, and we found that they were under attack, and their houses were being firebombed, and there were youth with bats and clubs waiting outside all the time. So the anti-racist committee in Boston got expanded quite a bit at the time, and we had emergency callings, you know, for when this happened, so we could go out and try to protect these people in the house and to stop this madness. But I was still pretty naive at the time. When I went to one of these evenings we were called out, I was a few months pregnant with my second child, and I was standing there, and there were these youth and even older men with bats and bottles, and little did I realize when the police came, I thought that would be good. Here come the police, we're gonna, you know, they're gonna break this up and arrest them or take them away. And instead they started to attack us. So I was so shocked by what they were doing that I didn't even feel like the pain of when they were hitting me. But I was like, what's going on there?
We were involved with neighborhood coalitions, which involved us in doing welfare rights support work. We worked with youth in the community. We were monitoring instances of police brutality. We started a community bail fund, which is still in existence now, 13 years after it was organized by us. And those programs were instituted because we had gone into the neighborhoods, into the projects, and this is what people said that we needed. You know, poor people were spending too much time in jail because they didn't have money to get out on very minor charges. That there was police brutality in the neighborhoods, and that needed to be monitored. We needed to organize against it. We had our own newspaper. We had a drop-in center. We provided housing. We located jobs when we could find them. We did fundraising festivals. We did Attica support work. In our newspaper, we were doing work then in support of education and then in support of political prisoners. But it was a wide range of work. Initial focus was on prisoners, on their families, and support work. For instance, we provided free transportation to poor people to prison to visit their family and friends there. As that work developed and started to be meaningful and started to have some impact in neighborhoods and on people, we caught the attention of the FBI and the local police.
Ray talked about the things that were coming down in Portland around the time that we were doing the work there in Scott, picking up a telephone to call somebody, and you're talking to the FBI, you know, straight up talking to them. They had the place bugged to the max.
Those of us that were most involved with that became kind of targets of the police. They knew our names, they knew where we lived, and we were harassed. And our phones, we got threatening phone calls and things. We weren't sure whether it was police or Klan. We didn't know. The Red Squad from Cambridge came busting into the house to harass us. They didn't have any reason. They didn't identify themselves. Just came in and told the men to leave and the women to go into a room, and we would get out of here. We're going to call call the police, and they said, like, well, you never mind, we're going to... So we just said, oh, this is outrageous. So
about 1974, we opened the Red Star North bookstore in Portland, Maine, which was a bookstore that carried a lot of political books, pamphlets, newspapers, revolutionary material on everything from labor history to black struggle, quite a wide range of material, and we did a free books to prisoners program out of there. And in conjunction with our work from SCAR, we came under attack, which at that time was in the framework that there were a lot of programs instituted by the FBI and state and local police in which people who were struggling for revolutionary change, people who were struggling for progressive changes, you could just be a progressive union labor organizer, or you could be a Black Panther. You were going to come under attack. You could be a Native American. You could be out in North Dakota and be an Indian person and end up dead in a ditch real quick in the early 70s. And it can still happen. In that framework, we came under attack in Portland. There was a scandal of sorts that was uncovered where it was determined that there was a death squad that had formed within the Portland Police Department that had targeted certain ex-prisoners, of which it was rumored that SCAR organizers were on it, because many of us were ex-prisoners that were working with SCAR. There were public hearings on this, and we demonstrated against it and tried to expose that as much as we could. It was generally whitewashed because only one cop ever got criminal charges brought against him and dismissed from the force, but other names were brought up. When the bookstore came under attack, it did so in such a manner in which first it began with surveillance by the police, then notes and letters, death threats coming into the mail with swastika and Nazi kind of slogans on them. Then one of the women co-workers and comrades was physically beaten up and raped while she was working in the bookstore. The bookstore was partially destroyed, books ripped up, posters ripped up, and then there was a raid on the bookstore in which I was arrested, and the cop leading the raid was one of the cops implicated in the death squad. This was a combination of events at that time that were pretty typical about in terms of what the FBI and local police were carrying out against people struggling for social change.
Because of the repression of the death squad, just the hassles going on, trying to keep these programs working, you know, it became more urgent for me to get into the kind of struggles that I was reading about in this newspaper that we were putting together about, you know, actions happening in different places in the country, Wounded Knee going on, stuff like that. I decided that, you know, there are people in Portland that can continue these things and do a good job with these things that are going to be left behind. The bail fund, the bookstore, the Sky Center. And there was a need for more people underground doing those kind of clandestine things away from the eyes and the ears of the government, you know. And I felt, seeing as how we were riding around town with guns stuck in our belt anyway, we might as well take it the next logical step, which is getting away from where the government can be watching you all the time, where you don't pick up your phone and talk to the FBI and do those kinds of things that are associated with the armed clandestine movement. So late 74, some of us picked up and made that first move towards this mysterious thing they call the underground.
My education when it came to the left was basically through newspapers and books and stuff. I didn't have that much contact with the outside. And I had this fantasy that it was like everybody was together and that they were like, you know, struggling to make things better. When I get out, I was very disappointed, especially so about the white left. It seemed to me that, I mean, I already knew about COINTELPRO. I already knew how the FBI had infiltrated organizations and split them up and factionalized them. But, like I say, I had this utopian outlook, and when I got out, I just found I mean, this is just my opinion, but that a lot of the left was fragmented, was too concerned with their own ideology to worry about anybody else's, too concerned about having a correct line, too concerned about their own, be a lot of backbiting and fighting with each other. This group would hate this group because their view on this, and this group would hate this group. And to me, it seemed like we weren't going to get any place. That at this rate, it's, you know, there's nothing there. So I had decided that probably the only way to have any type of organization that wasn't infiltrated by the police, that would be able to work you know, beyond the eyes and ears of the government, you would have to do that clandestinely.
Probably as a result of, you know, my activities, my political activities up until that point, and probably as a result of, you know, the things I was becoming involved in, I noticed that there was a very definite police interest in my whereabouts and what I was doing and so forth. As feeling that my options were pretty limited by this constant surveillance and you know, tails on me and phones and bugs on my phone and all the rest of it, I decided that I would be much more effective if I got beyond the eyes and ears of the government. In other words, if I went underground, which I did.
I realized that I couldn't continue with the work I was trying to do in the community because of this harassment, because of this constant fear. In fact, we partially moved underground, meaning to say that we just moved away from where we were living to see if it was the police who were having tabs on us, or if it was just someone who found out where we lived that just was a Klansman or something that wanted to harass us. And I was a few months pregnant at the time when we moved away, when I had the 2 small children already. And we wanted to protect our family from possible danger that we saw as a real thing. So I began thinking in terms of what do we need to do, both to protect ourselves, our children, and to continue with our work. As it turns out, the FBI and the state police were looking for comrades, different people that were already on the ground, and some that weren't already, but that they couldn't locate at the time. So I was still visiting my parents, and they came to look for me to ask about other people. And I wouldn't tell them, so they followed me 24 hours a day. So when I did decide it was time definitely to leave, I did leave while they were with my 3 children, while they were following me, but they were a little more angry when I just slipped out and did that. So I decided to go underground for a dual kind of reason, both for protection and to be able to, you know, it was a defensive thing and also an offensive thing, in that I knew that I couldn't do anything. I mean, I couldn't do any legal, even. I'm saying not that I had to go do something, that anything we did was in their eyes and ears. All the phones were tapped. All of us were all being watched, everyone that I associated with. So it was really not a big choice. It was a necessity.
Because I was politically becoming aware of so many different issues that it was frightening to me to see what was happening, that there was really this death squad and that they were attacking us. And because of the situation at that time, as Ray said, he decided to go underground. Well, you know, Tom also made that decision. And I was more or less faced with that I could stay above ground, and I really didn't know what I was going to do if I did stay above ground, since I had a 1-year-old child at the time. I didn't have any work, and we were somewhat semi on welfare at the time. And so because of my personal relationship with Tom, and because we did have this child together, and I wanted this child to know its father, and I chose to go underground with him. Our reasons for going underground at the time were different. You know, his was political and mine was personal.
As a father, as one of the parents responsible for young children, and at the time I was pregnant, our baby was due pretty soon. As she mentioned, we felt it was necessary that we had to leave our address, our phone, and I think this speaks a little bit to, about going underground, about clandestinity. I mean, sometimes it's a conscious thought, and sometimes it's a necessity, a survival measure that one takes to be able to still continue to do political activity, do your work, and at the same time provide the safety that's necessary, particularly when that safety concern is not just for yourself and your own body, but for like your children and other people you may be responsible for.
Part of the FBI's counterinsurgency against the revolutionary movement, we're using our children. There were 9 children of the Ohio 7, that they used pictures of 3-day-old infants up to children that were 8 and 9, with every kind of picture they could find, and everything about their medical problems and needs and allergies, and it was outrageous to see that they used our children like that. So when we became aware of how extensive the level of counterinsurgency was, we were quite worried. But we tried not to bring it right into the children. The children were conscious that this was a potentially dangerous situation, but it wasn't a daily feel. We lived it.
When Carol and I were captured in Virginia, they disappeared our children. Would not tell us where they were, would not tell our lawyers where they were, would not tell our family where they were. We kept them incommunicado. They approached us, Carol and myself, asking us to cooperate with them, and if we did, we could make it, we being the government, they could make it easy on the children, using the children as a lever against us, The prosecutor from New York, from the federal court in New York, Gallagher, showed up in her jail cell, outside her jail cell in Virginia, talking to her that if she would talk to him, he could make things easier for the children, They come to me and tell me if I sign extradition papers to New Jersey, they can make it easier on the children, They kept them incommunicado for 2 months.
On the day that they came to arrest us, they surrounded our house and called on the telephone and said, the house was surrounded by the FBI, to come up with our hands up. Well, we told them there were children in the house, not to do anything crazy. We had to get their shoes and jackets on. It was pouring rain, and they told us, no, just send them out as they are, and send them out alone, and send them out first.
If our children are without their parents now, they're with someone who loves them very much and who respects us, and because of that makes it a lot easier for us to have something to say about how our children are growing up now. They're living right now with a lot more sadness and pain than children their age than any of us would want them to have, because they have to be separated from us. But they understand that we are a principled people that believe in something, that this government knows what we stand for and doesn't like it. And so in their own way, they understand why we're in prison, that we're not bad, that we are good people, and that we stand for something good.
One of our daughter's names is Rosa. She's named for Rosa Luxemburg, who was an anti-fascist, anti-Nazi fighter. A person that Rosa Luxemburg fought and gave her life for the struggle of oppressed people in Nazi Germany. Her commitment was to the freedom of the working class. People like Harriet Tubman, Harriet Tubman was a guerrilla fighter. Harriet Tubman had the will to fight and to be a revolutionary, to be somebody who's committed to free people from oppression. You had to have the will to fight. And Harriet Tubman had that. And Harriet Tubman had the will to fight racism and slavery and put her life on the line. And when she did it, she carried a gun. And that's why the United States government put a price tag on her head, and she became a fugitive. And she fought for the rights of women. Lolita LeBrun, Puerto Rican independentista, a tremendous example in the past and today as she continues to fight for her people. That's the example in the legacy that our daughters, we have 3 daughters, Pat and I, that they have. And I think that their own mother is a very good example for our daughters, as well as my comrades Barbara and Carol.